Hello and welcome back to my series for International Women's Day, where I speak to lots of women about their experience and expertise. I'm really excited today to be joined by Francesca Specter, whose new book Alonement talks all about being alone and her experiences of that and lots of tips and advice around it. And today we're going to talk about the kind of stigma of being alone as a woman, her advice, and also a little bit of plugging of the book. But for now, roll the tape. Hi Francesca, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi Alice, thank you so much for having me on.
I'm really excited. So we're filming this in advance, but when this comes out, this will be publication day for you, which is really exciting.
This is mad. I mean, God, future me right now is just like a ball of nerves and excitement and gosh, yes. So 4th of March, publication day.
Yeah. It must mostly be excitement though, right? Because you've written it now, like that bit, the hard work's done, right? Really?
Yeah. No, it's done and dusted. I'm getting my proof copy through very soon, and also exciting. So Alonement, my first book.
That's great. Do you want to tell everyone watching a little bit about the book and why it was important to you to write this book?
Yes, absolutely. So Alonement, or its full title, Alonement, How to Be Alone and Absolutely Own It, is a book, as you might have guessed, about positive solitude, which is what I call alonement. And to start with, the book's title, the reason that I came up with the word alonement was because I realized there wasn't actually a word in the English language, or to my knowledge, any other language, to describe when the feeling of being alone is not loneliness, but when it's at the other end of the spectrum, when it's a positive, joyful experience. And that rooted from a personal challenge to myself to learn to love alone time, because I used to be terrified of it. And so that personal challenge, again, alonement was the language I used as shorthand for myself at the very start, just to almost give this a rebrand in my head. And it then became the way that I could convey to other people this journey I was going on, which turned into something. It was the most fulfilling lesson I've learned as an adult, learning to spend time alone.
Yeah, because it's quite I know, at least from my experience, sometimes it can be quite a scary concept, especially at the moment. We are spending a lot more time on our own, even if we're living, with people. We're still, we're working, most of us, in an isolated place. We're like doing all that kind of thing. So it's, and like you say, there's no sort of positive word for it. Yeah, well, there is now. Alonement, that's the word people can use. So as this is a series for International Women's Day, and I know we spoke about this on the phone when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, but do you feel, because I know I do, so this is very much a leading question, but do you feel that there's more stigma around spending time on your own as a woman?
Yes, well, I mean, there are lots of different parts to this. So there's lots of different ways in which you can be alone. There's being alone when you're traveling. There's being alone. A lot of the time people use being alone as a kind of shorthand for being single, even though they are different concepts. And there's also just going out in public and doing your thing. And I think across all of those spheres, across all of those types of aloneness, there is a strange stigma around women doing that. Whether that is because throughout history women are sort of defined as what they are to other people, as they, as a wife, as a mother, as a caregiver, and we're not used to that sort of solitary figure of a woman. There's also the sort of notion that the very insidious narrative that's come around solo travel. So things like the Grace Millane case, when people say, oh, solo female travelers shouldn't be doing this, they shouldn't be putting themselves in that position.
They blame the women in those situations, don't they? It's never, it's never the people doing the things to women. It's always, oh, well, you shouldn't be traveling on your own. So yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And that's perpetuated by the way that the media puts it across, and these stories will be revisited on so many women. It will always be the account that, perhaps someone who does mean well will give and say, look, you really shouldn't go, do this travel, you really shouldn't put yourself in this position of amazing freedom and exploration that can be really, fulfilling because of this one example, because you will be punished for being alone as a woman.
Yeah, I think it's quite scary, but also do you think it's getting easier and better to be a woman on your own, or just because, like you say, I think there's a difference between being single and being on your own, and there's always this kind of stigma of you must always be looking for someone if you're not with someone, which I think is really interesting. And how, even so, I'm in a relationship, but in our relationship it's really important that we do spend time on our own as well as with each other. So I think that distinction is really important. Do you feel like there's more pressure on women to always be looking for someone, or to always have someone, like in a romantic way?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, so if you see a woman sitting alone at a restaurant, quite often, I don't know, I suppose it's the other way around. If you are a woman sitting alone at a restaurant, you'll maybe assume that people think you've been stood up, or that you're in a vulnerable position. But I think the more that you see people choosing to be alone, whether that's because they're in a relationship like yourself and just actually really value alone time, or they are single and owning it. And we do talk about that more now, because there's the single positivity movement, which is a whole movement around the good side of being single, and how that is not just a kind of a waiting room for the rest of your life, how that can be a really fulfilling status in itself. So I think and again, I'm quite conscious that I don't want to conflate the ideas of being single and alone, but they do cross over quite a lot in all these maybe assumptions that we make about alone, spending time alone not being a choice, and being something that does root from being single. Whereas actually now we're seeing so many positive role models doing it, whether they're single or not. We are able to detach these concepts a bit more and make alone an empowering status. And and also, I think we speak about women being alone in public spaces. Men, I think it's in the past, it's been much more normalized to sort of see, a middle-aged or older man having a pint in the pub by himself. And, whatever space that's in, I think that it's just an increasing normalization of women feeling able to do that. I mean, I personally love going to cafes by myself and sitting there. And I think that actually it's interesting, because I surveyed my Twitter followers on this. When people see women alone in cafes, or anyone alone in cafes, they'll think, oh, they look glamorous or intriguing or empowered. And it really isn't the narrative that you have in your head.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So what advice would you give to people, apart from buying your book, obviously, what advice would you give to people who want to get more comfortable with spending time on their own?
Yes, well, of course, do buy the book, because it's out today. And yes, there's an absolute practical guide to every guise that you can be alone in. I think to start off with, though, it really does come down to that rebranding what alone means, and confronting that, and maybe thinking, look, I came from a very sociable family where I was told it was a negative thing to be alone, but this can change. What do I get from being alone? What do I want to seek from it? Whether that's pursuing my interests more in private, or just getting a bit more relaxation time or self-care, or whatever. It's rebranding that idea, and then pursuing what you want during your alone time. And it's that self-enforcing, because you think, oh, I have had a really great night looking after myself, I want to do that again. It does perpetuate itself.
Something you shared on your Instagram, I think, was it yesterday or the day before, because while we're recording this, you're currently doing 28 days of alonement. Something that you mentioned was buy yourself flowers, because don't wait for other people to buy you flowers. Treat yourself, and sort of make that sort of spending time on your own a positive thing, and that sort of thing. I was like, yeah, I'm always talking about how I've only sort of been bought flowers twice in my life. Why don't I just go out and buy myself flowers and sort of take care of myself in that way? I think it's really nice.
Oh my gosh, yes. So I completely advocate that. So just to briefly, 28 days of alonement is a challenge I've done throughout lockdown in order to do something novel by myself every single day. So I've done things like with limited success, like pasta making, which did not go well, to things like life drawing, or even just buying myself a bunch of flowers. And I've had in the past, I've had romantic partners who bought me flowers. I've had ones who didn't, and there was no correlation between whether they happened to be a good partner or not. That,
Yeah.
often that comes from, the family they grow up in, or, what they've seen in films or whatever. But I think if that's a desire that, if you like having flowers in your home, which personally I do, then being able to acknowledge and satisfy that desire in yourself is a really lovely thing.
Yeah.
And also I think it helps other people once you show yourself that love. And I love buying flowers for my friends as well. Maybe I'll buy flowers for a man I'm seeing one day, who knows. See if I can rewrite that narrative. But buying flowers for yourself, you learn, even as simple as, I know that I like cheap yellow flowers, like I don't need expensive flowers, and that would be a really good way possibly to give a cue to someone else about what your needs are, because you've acknowledged them. But only you can find that out about yourself first. You don't really want someone to have to do the guesswork, and maybe that's not how they show love, or maybe they could learn to show love that way, whatever. But Alonement is about satisfying those desires first and foremost.
Yeah.
For yourself.
And I guess learning what they are for yourself as well, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you can't expect anyone else to understand that, or even yourself to just know what it is you kind of need to be happy. You need to figure that out, and often that does come from, as cheesy as it sounds, sort of self-discovery and spending time on your own and sort of learning who you are, which I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so this has been great. Thank you so much. I think it's a good note to end on. We are limited by Instagram's length, but don't forget, Francesca's book Alonement is out now. Not now, but when this comes out now. I'll make sure I leave a link in the description, and thank you so much for joining me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alice. Lovely to speak to you.